This was supposed to be the night I celebrated his victory from afar. Curled up in a nest of silk pillows in our Chicago penthouse, I was following doctor's orders for absolute bed rest. Our unborn daughter kicking softly against my side.
I want to thank my colleague here
Across
for
the
her
room, a
invaluable
live
contribution
stream
to
of
the
the
project
Pritzker
rollout.
Architecture Prize
couldn't have done it
ceremony
without
played
her.
on the wall screen. A crisp digital link to the glittering world I could no longer join. All while, I waited for my husband, Julian, to accept the highest honor of his career. He had called me an hour before, his voice electric, with the familiar pre-show energy, claiming he had to do a final walkthrough of the presentation graphics with his lead designer. I chose to trust him because I had built a life on trusting him. When the presenter called his name, a swell of pride surged through me. I watched him stride to the podium, an artist at the peak of his power, ready to deliver the kind of visionary speech he was famous for. But then, an email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was an automated alert from our cloud storage, confirming a new file upload to a shared folder. The folder was titled Elysian Retreat, and there, in the file name, was the name of his lead designer, Serena Vane. The file wasn't a graphic, it was a hotel confirmation. Not for the conference hotel, but for a private villa at a coastal resort, booked for two. I saw her name on the itinerary next to his, a secret world laid bare in a PDF. The booking wasn't for one night, it was for the entire week, a meticulously planned escape hidden in plain sight. They didn't need a photograph. The calculated, scheduled intimacy of it felt like a shard of glass in my throat. I saw it all, right there in the serene glow of our penthouse. A choked, ragged sound escaped my lips. Why was he at a resort with her? My body went rigid. I reached for the water on the bedside table, but my hand was shaking too violently to grip the glass. My phone lit up on the duvet. A text from Julian. The speech was a home run. Heading back to the hotel. Love you. Nausea rolled through me in a hot, sickening wave. From the live stream, a thunderous applause echoed, the audience completely unaware that my entire universe had just been fractured by a file upload. I clicked the screen off, but it was pointless. The image of their names on that reservation was burned into my memory, sharper than any photograph. A sudden, sharp pain radiated across my lower back. Oh God, not now. I took a shuddering breath, fighting to calm the storm that had just been unleashed inside me. It's okay, little one. We're okay. But I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that this was only the first tremor before the earthquake, because the betrayal I found in that digital file was nothing compared to the secrets I was about to unearth. And the next truth would be infinitely more catastrophic. For years, my purpose had been to protect Julian's genius. I clung to that role through countless dinners, eaten alone, forgotten anniversaries, and weekends I spent researching neonatal specialists, while Julian sketched the skylines of the future. He always said he was too deep in the creative zone to manage the logistics. I was the logistics. Our daughter's high-risk pregnancy was a logistic. I was every invisible beam holding the architecture of our lives together. Lying there in our silent, cavernous penthouse, I stared out at the glittering Chicago skyline he helped create, feeling like an uninvited guest in my own home. The scale model of the sustainable family home I'd been designing for us in Napa sat on a bookshelf, and the antique Cartier watch Julian gave me when we found out I was pregnant, grand gestures designed to obscure his emotional absence, now looked like artifacts from a marriage that was a complete fiction. The devastating truth was that Julian had started designing his exit long before tonight's digital confession. He stopped asking about the doctor's appointments. He missed the ultrasound where we heard our daughter's frantic, beautiful heartbeat for the first time. He called the carefully prepared organic meals I ate over the top. He dismissed my bone-deep fatigue as just being dramatic. Each little act of neglect was a hairline crack in the foundation, so small I didn't realize I was standing in ruins until it was too late. I explained it all away. I made myself smaller. I told myself that great art required sacrifice, and I was simply his partner in that sacrifice. But seeing the planned intimacy of that week with Serena forced me to look at a truth I had been desperately avoiding for months. Julian wasn't just distracted. He had emotionally abandoned our marriage a long, long time ago. I shifted in bed, my hand resting on my stomach, and my arm brushed against his leather messenger bag, left behind from his last business trip to Zurich. It smelled faintly of perfume, something with notes of jasmine and amber, a scent I never wore. He used to smell of my citrus shampoo and the cedarwood scent of his own cologne. Now, he carried the scent of another woman's life, a life I was clearly not a part of. My daughter moved inside me, a slow, determined roll. "What are we going to do?" I whispered to her. "I don't know," I answered myself, because pretending everything was fine would only break us more. Her movement was an anchor. It wasn't despair that flooded me, but a cold, sharp focus. I wasn't in the process of losing a husband. I had already lost him. Still, I never could have imagined that the betrayal went so much deeper than an affair. Someone else was about to show me just how long Julian had been building an entirely separate life. Morning came, but sleep never did. I'd spent the night staring at the hotel confirmation. But what kept me awake was a practical, terrifying thought. Our finances, our properties, our daughter's trust, Julian's CFO managed all of it. For years, he had insisted it was simply more efficient for his team to handle the complexities. I went along with it because I wanted to be a supportive partner. But a partnership requires transparency. And at some point, he had stopped treating me like his wife and started managing me like an asset in his portfolio. I picked up my laptop from the nightstand and opened the wealth management app I rarely touched. A list of our joint assets appeared: LLCs, offshore funds, real estate holdings. The numbers were immense, abstract, and felt completely alien to me. Without Julian's digital signature, I was locked out of accessing a single dollar. My fingers went cold with the realization. My fear wasn't about being without Julian. It was the terror of bringing my daughter into a world made deliberately unstable by her own father. A wave of dizziness hit me, and my breath hitched. A panic attack. I squeezed my eyes shut and started the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, I whispered aloud. You are safe. The baby's security was all that mattered. The idea of Julian using our child's future as a bargaining chip in a divorce made a cold dread crawl up my spine. I navigated to the online portal for our main joint bank account, the one with the sleek, user-friendly interface. My stomach dropped. Authentication failed. Julian had changed the security protocols. He always used his team's advice on cybersecurity as a reason for frequent password changes. But this felt different. This felt like a vault door slamming shut. A definitive message that I was out. My laptop chimed, an alert from a secure messaging app I'd never installed. It was from an anonymous user. You need to look at Julian's shell corporations. Start with Apex Design Ventures. I froze. Attached to the message was a password-protected zip file. The password was a single word, Serena. Inside was a screenshot of a wire transfer. $10 million moved to a holding company in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks ago. My baby kicked, a sharp, violent jab, as if she could feel my shock. I swallowed against a throat gone dry. My fear was being burned away by a clean, white-hot rage, but a deeper anxiety settled in my bones, because this anonymous messenger knew far more than I did. And if Julian was secretly moving millions of dollars, what other lies had he built right under my nose? And who was this person in the shadows, sending me these clues? The hours after the awards ceremony bled into a surreal, sleepless fog. By 10 p.m., the penthouse was eerily silent, the city lights below like a field of scattered embers. I lay in our bed, watching the bedroom door, half dreading the moment he'd walk through it and half terrified that he never would. My phone was dark. No text from Julian, no calls, no flimsy excuses for being late, nothing. At 11:30, I called his phone. It went straight to his polished, confident voicemail. I called again. The same thing. The man who lived by his schedule, who preached that precision was everything, had simply vanished the moment his own design had a flaw. I wanted to feel a storm of fury, but all I could summon was a vast, hollow ache spreading through my chest. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered, completely indifferent to my personal demolition. The distant hum of traffic, the faint wail of a siren, it all worked together to make me feel impossibly small, as if the entire world was a witness to my collapse and didn't even blink. I pushed myself out of bed, needing to feel a solid floor under my feet. On the minimalist console table sat the crystal decanter of Japanese whiskey he loved. It was a symbol of the perfect life he had constructed, a life he allowed me to live in, but never truly be a part of. My laptop chimed again, another message from the same anonymous source. Checked the flight logs for his private charter. My heart hammered against my ribs as I logged into the jet company's client portal, a system I knew he used for all his international travel. A list of shared calendar events materialized on the screen: a board retreat in Napa, a tech conference in Kyoto, a solo coding weekend in Lake Tahoe, and listed as a mandatory attendee for every single one, Serafina Dubois. There were dinner reservations for 2, couples spa treatments, and the most recent entry, a private beachfront villa in Maui, booked for the upcoming long weekend. A bitter taste rose in my throat. Julian wasn't avoiding my calls because he felt any guilt. He was with her, right now. He had architected this parallel life with the same meticulous precision he used to design software. I stared at the tablet until the names blurred. All those nights he was supposedly handling a server emergency. All the times he said he was flying out for a last-minute investor pitch. He wasn't just lying. He was systematically programming an existence that didn't include me, right under my nose. The glass house was deafeningly quiet. I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard the distinct whir of the smart lock on our front door. Someone was right outside. Someone was entering a passcode. A series of quiet beeps was followed by a sharp, angry buzz and a flash of red light. Access denied. A brief pause. Then, nothing but silence. I held my breath, listening for the sound of retreating footsteps, but the quiet was absolute. My own heart hammered against my ribs. It might be a late-night food delivery with the wrong address. It could be Julian, a little drunk, and forgetting the new guest code he had just set. Or it could be her, thinking she still had clearance. I couldn't risk finding out which. I engaged the secondary deadbolt from my phone and turned back to the tablet. The synced expense reports read like a confession Julian never wanted me to see. There was a charge for a private suite at the Post Ranch Inn in Big Sur for that very evening. A table for 2 at a restaurant he'd always called our special place. 2 first-class tickets to Singapore, booked just last week. And then I found the line item that turned my blood to ice. A recurring payment for a helicopter charter service, with a flight path between our building and Serafina Dubois' penthouse in Pacific Heights. Not once or twice, but several times a week for the past 8 months. A wave of dizziness swept over me. For nearly a year, he had been running a completely separate life while I was confined to our home on strict bed rest, carefully planning a nursery for our daughter. On instinct, I tried to open our shared portfolio management app. Authentication failed. It was another locked door, confirming that Julian was methodically severing my access to the world we had supposedly created. The tablet chimed with a notification from a secure messaging app. Check the vault. The one behind the de Kooning. My eyes flew to the massive, chaotic painting dominating our living room wall. The stark, modern walls of our San Francisco penthouse suddenly felt like a cage. I walked silently into our home office, the plush rug swallowing my footsteps, and picked up the unopened box containing a prototype of his company's new smart device. It was a gift I had planned to give him. As I powered it on, it automatically synced to his network, and a shared folder I'd never seen before appeared, Project Elysium. My stomach dropped as I opened it, revealing offshore account statements, shell company incorporation documents, and legal retainers under the names Julian Croft and Serafina. The air rushed out of my lungs. It all made a sickening kind of sense. The constant all-nighters at the office, the growing chasm between us. This wasn't just an affair. He was engineering a total restructuring of our assets, one that had no place for me or our unborn child. A future where we were simply a problem to be solved. I sank into his leather office chair, the tablet shaking in my lap. His betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a meticulously crafted business plan, and the most twisted part was that he was funding it with the capital from the first startup we built together. A sharp, terrifying thought pierced through my shock. Someone had arranged for me to see this. Someone knew exactly how to unlock Julian's secrets. My phone lit up with a text from a blocked number. That house is compromised. He'll be back soon. I stared at the words, my pulse frantic. Because if Julian came home and saw this discovery in my expression, I knew what he was capable of when his perfectly coded world was threatened with a system crash. And this anonymous source clearly believed I had to be gone before that happened. The next morning, the fog rolling in from the bay made the penthouse feel impossibly cold. I hadn't slept a minute, torn between the dread of Julian's return and the fear that he wouldn't. I tried to eat some toast for the baby, but my hands trembled too much to lift it. The baby, a tiny, perfect human caught in this matrix of lies. While forcing down some water, I opened the tablet again, desperate for anything that might explain this nightmare. A new message sat at the top of the secure chat log, time-stamped 2:27 a.m. It was from Serafina. Dubois. I couldn't breathe. I braced myself for a gloating message, a final insult. But as I read the preview, I saw it wasn't for me. It was a message sent to a group chat with Julian and their legal team, which the tablet was still logged into. The subject was simple. Elysium Phase 2. Julian, your concerned husband act is flawless. She suspects nothing. After the last asset liquidation clears on Monday, we can serve the papers. The Cayman LLC is ready. I stopped breathing. The letters swam in front of my eyes. Serafina wasn't just his lover, she was his co-conspirator. The message contained a link to a secure document titled Asset Migration Plan. It was a detailed flowchart mapping out our entire net worth. The penthouse, our Napa vineyard, our tech portfolio, all being funneled into untraceable crypto wallets and offshore entities before I could ever be served with divorce papers. They were going to leave me with nothing. They had even scheduled the cancellation of my high-risk pregnancy insurance coverage. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over me. This was not a breakup. It was a hostile takeover of my life, a clinical deletion of our 10-year marriage. I downloaded the entire data vault to an encrypted thumb drive, then shoved the drive deep into my handbag. I needed proof. I needed a weapon. As I zipped the bag shut, a powerful kick from my baby reminded me precisely who I was fighting for. "It's you and me now, little one," I whispered, my voice ragged. "I've got you." But the promise felt fragile in the vast, empty home. My phone lit up again. It was the same blocked number. "You have what you need. Get out now, one bag. Don't be there when he gets home." A profound chill settled into my bones. Whoever was sending these messages knew everything, and I had a horrible feeling that their next warning would shatter the last pieces of my reality. That afternoon, I was driving south on Highway 1. My doctor had ordered absolute bed rest, but staying in that house felt like the far greater danger. A primal need to protect my child was screaming at me to run. As I drove, my mind flashed back to a tech party a few weeks ago. I'd been too tired to go, so Julian went by himself. A friend mentioned the next day that she'd seen him in a hushed, intense conversation with Serafina by the infinity pool. I had dismissed it as a business talk. Now, the memory replayed as a public spectacle of my own humiliation. My face burned with shame. All of Silicon Valley must have seen it. The entire tech elite probably watched them together and felt a flicker of pity for the pregnant, naive wife sitting at home. The Golden Gate Bridge, shrinking in my rearview mirror, looked like a monument to the life he was stealing from me. I gripped the steering wheel, a single hot tear cutting a path down my cheek. He didn't just break our vows. He coded our entire marriage as a fraud. He had been at my side for every single ultrasound, his hand resting gently on my belly, talking about the apps he was going to build for our daughter. He had hired a world-famous architect to design the nursery, specifying every non-toxic material and smart home feature himself. It was all a performance, a perfectly engineered user experience, designed to keep me passive while he dismantled our future. And the most monstrous part was his plan to strip me of everything: the home we had built, the future we had planned, the financial security for our child. He intended to leave me with nothing but a shattered life and a baby he clearly viewed as a bad investment. I pulled the car over at a scenic viewpoint, the sheer weight of his betrayal making it hard to breathe, and let out a sob that felt torn from my soul. I wasn't just being left. I was being systematically erased. My daughter deserved a better story than one that began with a father who saw her as a glitch in his master plan. I wiped my tears, the grief inside me hardening into steel. I refused to be a footnote in his biography. For her, I would become the bug he could never, ever patch. I made that silent promise to her, my hand resting protectively over my stomach. As I merged back onto the highway, my phone buzzed one more time. It was my anonymous guardian, Julian's home. "He knows you're gone. Your car's tracker will activate in 10 minutes. Get off the grid. Now." My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles were white. This person wasn't just a tipster. They had access to Julian's personal security network. They were an insider. And then the next email preview flashed on his unlocked laptop, and I knew they were plotting to destroy my future too. The subject line was stark and clinical: Asset Isolation Strategy. The sender was a woman named Cassandra. A shiver of ice traced its way down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder at the glass wall of his office, terrified he'd walk back in. Below, the lights of Boston glittered, oblivious. It wasn't just one email. It was a chain, a detailed plan, a silent, calculated demolition of our shared life. I forced myself to take a deep, steadying breath, placing a hand on my swollen belly. This had stopped being about a failing marriage. This was about survival. Richard wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to erase me. The kind of erasure that would leave me and our unborn son with nothing. I clicked on an attachment, a PDF of wire transfers to an offshore account. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was moving millions. It was all happening right now. I felt a cold wave of nausea. Another email provided the final, devastating blow. Subject: Our new beginning. Attached were architectural plans for a penthouse I had never seen. My whole body started to tremble. I had no idea who this Cassandra was, except that she was his wealth manager, and clearly his new partner. But staying meant confronting Richard, and my gut screamed that he was the real threat. A man who could orchestrately dismantle the life of his pregnant wife was capable of anything to get his way. I started forwarding every single email to a new anonymous account I'd created, my fingers flying across the keyboard. When I found the folder labeled Project Nightingale, I clicked it open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside were scanned contracts and deeds. A man in a crisp suit smiled from a photo ID on one of the documents. He looked accomplished, with shrewd eyes that seemed to see everything. He turned his head slightly as Richard entered the room. "Chloe." I jumped at my name. "What are you doing in here? Someone has to make sure our investments are secure, especially with the baby coming." My voice was surprisingly level. "My name is Julian Croft." The name on the documents hit me like a physical blow. Julian Croft, the real estate mogul, Richard's primary client, the man whose portfolio Richard managed. Why was Richard buying property with him under a shell corporation? My gaze fell to my stomach, then met Richard's. "You and your son deserve a secure future. He can never know you found this. Julian is on the phone with his legal team right this minute. They're fast-tracking the final purchase of the Seaport property." My heart froze in my chest. Fast-tracking? My brother David, an investigative journalist, nodded grimly over the video call. That's the word. They're using a loophole to bypass the final zoning review. My vision started to blur, and then he said the one thing that made the world stand still. "Chloe, Richard isn't just hiding this deal from you. He's hiding it from his own firm." Hours later, as I moved silently through our sprawling, empty brownstone on Beacon Hill, David's warning echoed in my ears. If Richard was willing to betray his own company, what chance did I stand? I had come back for one thing: a leather-bound ledger hidden in the back of his wine cellar. In the nursery, moonlight painted a silver square over the assembled crib, a cruel monument to a life he had just torpedoed. I prayed I'd be gone before he returned, but David insisted the ledger was my only proof of his unauthorized trades. I found it behind a case of vintage Bordeaux, my hands shaking as I pulled it from its hiding spot. The wine he bought the day we learned I was pregnant. The thick silence of the house felt suffocating, as if the air itself was waiting for a reckoning. I clutched the book and was turning to leave when I heard his key in the front door. The designer purse in my hand, containing my phone with photos of every page in the ledger, felt as heavy as a stone. At 11:15 in the evening, Richard came in. He smelled of expensive scotch and victory. His tailored jacket was slung over his shoulder, his expression confident. He stopped dead when he saw me standing in the hall, the ledger clutched in my hands. "You're still awake," he said, his voice flat. My own was surprisingly steady. "You missed our prenatal class." He didn't even blink. Something came up at work. I didn't have to argue. I walked to the marble-topped credenza in the entryway and placed the ledger on its surface, flipping it open to the last page of entries. For the first time in our 7-year marriage, I saw genuine, undiluted panic flicker across his face. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It was in the wine cellar," I said. my resolve hardening. Along with the deed for the Shell Corporation, the unsigned resignation letter on your desk, and the plans to make sure your pregnant wife was left holding nothing but debt. His jaw clenched. The mask of the charming financial advisor finally shattered. Chloe, you have no idea what you're playing with. Reservations for two. A weekend in a Martha's Vineyard cottage with someone named Cassandra. For a portfolio review? I asked, my voice trembling. His utter silence was all the answer I needed. The air in our meticulously decorated living room grew heavy and toxic. He took a threatening step closer, his voice sinking to a low growl. You don't understand the forces at play here, Chloe, and you would be much, much smarter to just forget everything you saw. The menace in his tone was unmistakable. There was no apology in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of me leaving him. He was terrified of me exposing him. I took a careful step back, my heart pounding. And then he made the critical error. A frantic, quiet whisper he thought I wouldn't hear. If she tells David what she found, he muttered to himself, the entire Nightingale deal will collapse. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. David, he knew my brother was a journalist. This was bigger than I thought. For a second, the antique Persian rug beneath my feet seemed to tilt, as if the truth had unsettled the very foundations of my world. I took a slow, deliberate breath and looked straight into Richard's eyes. What about my brother? I asked, my voice chillingly calm. Richard stiffened. His eyes darted toward the nursery we had just finished painting, then shot back to me. You misheard me, he said, the denial coming out too quickly, far too fast, far too panicked. No, I whispered, the word hanging like a fragile piece of glass in the tense silence. I heard you perfectly. He let out a sharp sigh, running a hand through his perfect hair. Chloe, things are complex. The pressure to close this deal has been immense. I made a few questionable moves. His voice turned sickeningly sweet, the condescending tone he always used to end an argument. You know how you get worked up over details, especially now with the pregnancy. That's why I kept it from you. I just stared at him, feeling every small gaslighting moment, every dismissed concern from our years together, finally sharpening into one undeniable point. So, how many questionable moves are we talking about? I shot back. 1? A dozen? Was any of the life you built with me ever actually real? Richard's expression hardened into stone. I have given you a lifestyle you could only have dreamed of. You should be a little more grateful. A familiar tide of guilt he had cultivated for years tried to rise, but this time it found nothing to cling to. In its place, something else was growing. Anger, certainly, but also a sense of self-preservation I hadn't felt in years. Providing for me is not the same as being honest with me, I stated. A muscle jumped in his jaw. You don't know what you're talking about. He took another step forward. I moved back. My hand instinctively went to my purse, where my phone, now holding pictures of the ledger and an audio recording of our entire conversation, was safely zipped inside. He saw the motion. What's in the purse, Chloe? Leverage, I answered, my voice ringing with newfound clarity. His face went dark, and for the first time, I saw raw fear in his eyes. It was not the fear of a husband losing his family. It was the fear of a predator losing his prey, his power, his freedom. Give it to me, he commanded. Number. He lunged, but motherhood had already made me fiercely protective. I grabbed my purse and dodged behind the grand piano, putting its polished bulk between us. My heart was beating wildly, but my voice was firm. You will never get this, and you will never come near me or this baby again. His breathing grew ragged. You are not walking out of this house with that phone. A terrifying chill washed over me. Just watch me. As if summoned, the baby's heart rate monitor I wore on my wrist buzzed softly. A scheduled check. Richard flinched at the sound. I used that split second of distraction to run for the front door. In that exact instant, my phone buzzed from inside my purse. A new text from David. Chloe. The woman isn't just his lover. She's his boss's wife. The words on the screen seemed to steal all the oxygen from the hallway. His boss's wife. My mind scrambled, desperately trying to fit together the pieces of a conspiracy I never realized I was at the center of. The quiet nursery had become a symbol that my life was now irrevocably linked to my child's. "We are leaving," I told Richard, my voice echoing with a finality that startled even me. "You're going absolutely nowhere." His voice was a venomous whisper. He moved to block the door, but some primal fear of hurting the baby seemed to hold him back just enough. For a man so willing to destroy his family, he was shockingly afraid of the evidence. With my handbag slung over one shoulder and a hastily packed duffel in my other hand, I faced him. "Get out of my way," I ordered. Arthur didn't budge. A cruel, confident smile played on his lips. "Nina, are you really so foolish to believe you can make a new life, 8 months pregnant, without my resources? Without the Thorn name protecting you?" His condescending tone was a familiar poison, but it had lost its sting. Not after the message I'd seen on his laptop. I moved around him and pulled the heavy oak door open. The private elevator foyer of our Gold Coast penthouse felt sterile and hostile. I rested a hand on my belly, my daughter's safety being the only thing that mattered. The adrenaline was a toxic flood, and a deep, instinctual fear took hold. Thousands of feet below, the lights of Chicago spread out like a diamond tapestry. I rushed toward the elevator, my heart hammering in my ears. As I crossed the marble lobby, my phone lit up. "A town car is waiting for you on the north side of the building. Get inside. Monsieur Maya, my sister, my only real ally in the world." I had no one else to call, no one else to trust. A dark sedan was idling at the curb, just as she'd promised. The driver stepped out and held the rear door open. "Ms. Vance, your sister sent me. She said to tell you she's waiting at the office," the driver added, his voice low. A tidal wave of panic washed over me. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to disappear, but returning to that penthouse meant facing Arthur, and I knew the man I left up there was far more dangerous than the one I had woken up next to this morning. I slid onto the plush leather seat. The door shut with a heavy, final sound, and the locks engaged, making me feel both trapped and secure. As the sedan merged into the flow of late-night traffic, I glanced back at our building. Arthur's silhouette was framed in the floor-to-ceiling window, a dark sentinel watching me get swallowed by the city. The driver spoke, his voice calm. "Ms. Vance is waiting." "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He caught my eyes in the rearview mirror. "To show you the research she found on Isabel, and to explain why Arthur was so terrified of what she was about to expose." The sedan cut through the downtown streets of Chicago, the city's glowing architecture reflecting on the tinted glass, like fragmented memories of the life I was escaping. I kept one hand protectively on my stomach, the small life inside me a constant, solid presence in the swirling chaos. The driver finally pulled up in front of a historic, unassuming building in the Loop. The building was the essence of discretion. It was powerful, but silent. The kind of place where billion-dollar deals were made, not advertised. He led me through a private entrance, along a quiet, wood-paneled corridor, and into a conference room where Maya was waiting. She didn't look like a litigator about to go to war. She looked exhausted, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and determination. "Nina," she said, her voice strained. She pointed to a chair across the mahogany table. "Sit. We have a lot to talk about." I remained standing, clutching my bag like a life raft. "Just tell me what you found." Maya gave a grim, weary nod. Before I do, you have to realize he's not just a cheater. I wrapped my arms around myself. Then you'd better start explaining. She drew a long, ragged breath. Arthur wasn't just having an affair. He targets specific people. Powerful people. People with access. He has a god complex. Thinks everyone is a pawn in his game. Maya began to pace the room, her hands clenched. But this woman was smarter and far more ruthless than he ever anticipated. A cold dread filled my chest. Who? Maya stopped her pacing. His chief competitor, the head of R&D at PharmaLife. Her name was Isabel. The name from the laptop screen hit me again, but Maya's next words made it hard to breathe. What do you mean, was? He met Isabel at a medical conference in Geneva. He thought he could charm her, steal trade secrets, get a leg up on PharmaLife's new cancer drug. She let him think he was in control. A sick, sour taste filled my mouth. What did he do to her? He tried to pay her off, Maya said, her voice tight with fury. When she refused the money, he threatened her, swore he'd ruin her reputation, plant false stories, go after her family. She came to me a month ago, terrified. A week later, she was gone. A chill spread across my skin. Gone? The police report says she took an abrupt leave of absence, citing burnout. But Isabel would never just walk away from her life's work. Maya looked me straight in the eye. The last thing she ever sent me was a single, encrypted voice memo, recorded the night she disappeared. My own breathing grew thin. Are you telling me? Maya gave a slow, somber nod. Yes. Arthur knows exactly what happened to Isabel. The conference room felt like it was closing in on me. Then Maya delivered the final shattering truth. The affair was never the real secret, Nina. It was just the cover story. By the next morning, the entire world felt like it had cracked wide open. I was in Maya's office, staring into a mug of coffee I had no intention of drinking. I hadn't slept, my mind replaying every lie Arthur had ever told me. Maya was standing by the window overlooking the Chicago River, her phone buzzing incessantly. Omnigen's stock is in freefall, she said, reading a new alert. Their board has called an emergency session. An anonymous source tipped off the FDA about falsified data in the clinical trials for their new flagship drug. My heart pounded in my chest. You think Arthur was breaking the law? Maya turned to face me, her expression grim with certainty. I think Arthur was knowingly pushing a drug with fatal side effects, and his partners are just now realizing the extent of their criminal liability. I should have been shocked, but all I felt was a cold, sharp sense of clarity. For years, he had made me feel crazy, overly suspicious, and emotionally unstable. Seeing his empire of lies begin to crumble felt like a brutal but necessary reckoning. But Maya wasn't finished. His publicist released a statement an hour ago, she went on. They're painting Isabel as an unstable corporate spy who was trying to blackmail him and sabotage his company. The trips, the jewelry. My voice trailed off. All documented as payments to a clinical consultant, Maya confirmed. It was part of the paper trail Isabel uncovered. The mention of her name sent another shiver through me. So, Isabel knew what he was doing? She figured it out, Maya said. She realized Arthur was intentionally letting their affair become public gossip. It was classic misdirection. Keep the media focused on the affair, not on the fact his new wonder drug was killing people. A cold fear snaked its way up my spine. What do you really think he did to her? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Maya's expression hardened. I think Isabel found the one piece of evidence that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. And he made sure both she and that evidence were permanently gone. Before I could process the horror of that statement, Maya's phone buzzed again. This time, her body went still, and all the color drained from her face. "What is it?" I asked, rising from my seat. She turned the screen so I could see it. A breaking news alert. Biotech. CEO. Arthur Thorne brought in for questioning by federal agents in connection with the disappearance of a rival executive. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. So it's over. Maya shook her head, her eyes filled with warning. "Nina, a man like Arthur doesn't just surrender. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of predator." As if her words had summoned him, my own phone vibrated on the table. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Arthur's voice was a low command. "Don't touch that." But my gaze was already fixed on the message that had just appeared on his open laptop. A single devastating line from a woman named Isabel. My world tilted on its axis. "Arthur, you need to call me. We have to finalize the offshore trust for the baby." Arthur's voice, normally so smooth and commanding, was now a raw, threatening hiss. My sister, Maya, looked at me as I played the audio file. "Isabel," Arthur's voice snarled from the phone's small speaker, "you are making a catastrophic mistake. You will not dictate terms to me." A woman's voice answered, her tone sharp and unafraid. "The second patent. It's already been filed under my name." The recording ended with a sharp click. Maya's face was stone. "He sounds desperate," she said. "That means Isabel had him trapped. She must have found concrete proof." My throat felt tight. What could possibly be worth more than his entire company? Maya gave me a grim look. "How about covering up the fact that his new blockbuster drug has a fatal side effect?" The air in the office suddenly felt thin and cold. "Do you think he hurt her?" Maya didn't need to answer. Instead, she walked to her desk, pulled a thick folder from her briefcase, and laid it on the conference table. "These are encrypted emails Isabel sent to a secure server right before she disappeared. I didn't want to show you until I knew for sure you were safe and away from him." My fingers felt numb as I opened the folder. Inside were pages of printed messages. "I have the original trial data for Omnigen's new heart medication. The mortality rate is higher than they're reporting." He buried the results. "He's pushing the FDA for accelerated approval. If I disappear, check the Geneva server logs. He'll know what that means." Another message was time-stamped a few hours later. "He knows I have a copy." And then the final one sent at 2:15 in the morning. "He's at my building. I should have never agreed to meet him here." Tears blurred my vision. Why didn't the police find this? "Oh, they looked into it," Maya said, her voice filled with disgust. "They took Arthur at his word. He'd painted Genevieve as a disgruntled data analyst, a corporate spy obsessed with him. He'd shown the board fabricated emails and a paper trail suggesting she'd sold company secrets. They bought every word of it. His reputation as a visionary architect combined with his substantial donations to Boston's civic projects made him untouchable. A bitter rage started to burn through my disbelief. Arthur hadn't just had an affair. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had systematically destroyed a woman who threatened his perfect world. Then a second realization hit me with the force of a physical impact. The encrypted warnings my sister Elle had been intercepting. "They weren't from Genevieve," Elle said, her voice low. "The data packets were routed through a dead drop by someone else." "Who?" She shook her head, her eyes fixed on her laptop. "A whistleblower. Someone inside Cole Architecture who knew what Genevieve had found and was trying to sound the alarm." Before I could even try to absorb that, Elle's tablet chimed with a priority news alert. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. "What is it?" I whispered. She turned the tablet so I could see it. The headline glowed in the dim light of the penthouse. Massive fire guts, coal architecture headquarters in Seaport. My heart stopped. Then I read the last sentence. Investigators cite evidence of arson, noting the blaze appears to have originated in the firm's central server room. The words hung in the silent apartment, a death knell for the life I thought I had. Central server room. Deliberately set. My first instinct was denial. Arthur didn't solve problems with fire. He solved them with lawyers and money. He was a builder, a titan of urban design. But as I connected the dots, the secret ledgers, Genevieve's disappearance, the targeted destruction of his data, I realized that burning it all down was the only move a guilty man had left. I felt a soft flutter from deep inside me, a tiny kick that jolted me into a terrifying new reality. "Clara, we have to go," Elle said, her tone sharp, snapping me out of my trance. I placed a protective hand over my growing belly. "We need to go somewhere he won't find us," I murmured, more to myself than to her. Elle looked at me with a fierce, unwavering resolve that I was deeply grateful for. "Clara, we need to leave right now. If Arthur is desperate enough to do this, he's beyond unpredictable." I took a long, shaky breath. "Where in God's name can we possibly go?" "I have a client safe house in Beacon Hill," she said. "Completely analog. Not even Arthur's security consultants could find it on a map." Within minutes, Elle had us moving. As we rode the service elevator down from our glass tower, I held my stomach, my racing pulse calming, only when I focused on the life I was now solely responsible for. I was no longer just running from Arthur. I was running to save my child. The elevator doors opened into a quiet, historic brownstone overlooking a cobblestone alley. Its old-world charm was a shocking contrast to the sterile, modern prison I had just fled. The city's glow seemed distant. It felt like another world entirely, a sanctuary in the middle of a storm. I walked to the window and placed my hand on the cool, wavy glass of the old pane. The gaslights on the street below flickered like captured stars. I had spent so many years living in a gilded cage, terrified of losing the comfort, the status, and the man I thought I loved, that I hadn't even noticed the bars closing in around me. The most dangerous thing I had ever done was trust him. Elle came to stand beside me. "Clara, there's something more." Just before the fire alarms went off, I intercepted one last data burst from the whistleblower. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. What did it say? It was a fragmented audio file. It's Arthur's voice. He said you were exposed, but that he wasn't the one you needed to be afraid of. A cold dread trickled down my spine. "Not afraid of him. That's insane." Elle paused for a moment. "He said his investors were tying up loose ends, and that they wouldn't stop with him." At that very instant, the secure entry panel by the door let out a soft, electronic chime. Both Elle and I froze. "No one is supposed to know we're here." The panel chimed again, and a man's steady, unfamiliar voice followed. "Eleanor, please open the door. I'm your source from Cole Architecture." That voice, so calm and measured, was infinitely more terrifying than any shouted threat. "Clara is in immediate danger. Let me in." My blood ran cold. I backed away from the door, my hand instinctively protecting my belly. Elle moved in front of me, her body language shifting from concerned sister to hardened cybersecurity expert. It was the posture of someone assessing an imminent threat. "Don't you move," Elle whispered. The voice came through the apartment's intercom again. "You're not safe in there, Clara. Not with the baby on the way. And not with what he gave you." Elle's face was like stone. "He knows about the baby. He knows you're here. This isn't a guess." I struggled to find my voice, the fear a solid lump in my throat. "What should we do?" Elle walked to the intercom panel on the wall, the source of his voice. On its small screen, a fisheye camera showed a man in his late 20s, standing on the stoop. He looked more like a nervous graduate student than a threat, but his eyes were wide with urgency. "That's not just a warning," Elle murmured, her eyes locked on the screen. "Those were offshore accounts in the ledger, routed through something called the Ethelred Group." My heart started to pound. "What is that?" "It's a private military contractor," Elle said, her voice grim. "If Arthur was paying them, this is about something far worse than bad real estate deals." The intercom crackled, the man's voice more insistent. "Eleanor, please. I'm trying to keep you both alive." The word alive felt like a punch. My voice trembled. "Elle, what is going on?" Elle kept her focus on the screen. She activated the microphone. "Identify yourself. State your purpose for being here." There was a brief pause. Then, "My name is Ben, and Arthur's partners didn't just want his mistress silenced. Genevieve found out what the Ethelred Group was really doing. Now they think Clara has the backup of her research." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What research?" Ben leaned closer to the camera. "The drive. The encrypted drive Genevieve copied before they took her. Arthur couldn't get it back. His partners are certain he gave it to you." My breath caught in my throat. "I don't have any drive." "It doesn't matter," Ben's voice said, through the speaker. "They believe you do." Elle's tone was like ice. "Who, Ben? Who are they?" He hesitated, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any name he could have spoken. "This is much bigger than Arthur Cole," he said softly. "He was just the architect." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The intercom crackled one last time as his voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "Clara, they're initiating the protocol tonight." For a long, heavy moment, the old brownstone was utterly silent. The distant sounds of Boston seemed to fade away as his warning settled around us. "They're initiating it tonight." My mind reeled. What protocol? What had Genevieve uncovered that was so important they would make her vanish and now hunt me down? Suddenly, Elle became a whirlwind of focused action, her calm demeanor replaced by sheer urgency. "Clara, go into the master bedroom. Lock the door and stay away from the window. Do it now." I stumbled through the living room, one arm wrapped around my belly. "It's all right, little one," I whispered, trying to soothe myself as much as the baby. "Mommy's got you." I turned the old brass key in the lock and pressed my ear against the solid wood door. When I risked a glance back into the living room, Elle was at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's a car waiting for you at the end of the alley behind this building," she said, her voice a clipped command. "No one will be expecting you to exit from the rear." A new surge of panic rose in my chest. "Do you think they followed you?" "I think they were always watching him," Elle replied, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Arthur wasn't just paranoid. He was owned." A sudden, powerful thud vibrated through the front door of the apartment. It wasn't a knock, it was the sound of a battering ram. "Clara?" My husband's voice echoed faintly from the alley below my window, amplified by a speaker. "We can work this out. Just give them the locket." Ice flooded my veins. The locket. The heavy, antique silver locket he'd given me for our anniversary, telling me it held digital copies of all our photos. I was wearing it. This was a coordinated attack. Ben's voice erupted from the intercom, filled with pure panic. "Don't let them in. They're not his people. They're Ethelred's operatives," he yelled, his voice straining. "Genevieve found out they were using Arthur's smart city tech to build surveillance. Backdoors for foreign governments. Arthur wanted to get out. When Jen threatened to expose them, they took her. Now they want her evidence." Elle's face was pale. "We're out of time." She kicked aside a rug in the corner of the living room, revealing an old iron ring set into the floorboards. She pulled it, and a section of the floor lifted, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. "Clara," she ordered, turning to me, "you go. This leads to the old tunnels under Beacon Hill. I have a guide waiting. Tell him Ethelred is calling." "What about you?" I cried. She pushed me toward the opening. "I'll wipe the drives here and create a digital ghost for them to chase. They want a data file, not a lawyer." A deafening crack sounded from the front door as its frame splintered. I turned to descend into the darkness. In that exact second, the power in the entire building cut out. The blackness was absolute, a sudden suffocating blanket that felt deliberate, as if a switch had been flipped on the whole block. I froze, my hand on the rough stone wall of the tunnel. Behind me, I heard the main apartment door splinter and crash inwards. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. My blood ran cold as I stared at the hidden ledger, its brittle pages illuminated by the single desk lamp. "Charlotte," his voice was a low, velvet-gloved threat from the doorway. "Arthur, I'm pregnant," I breathed, my hand flying to my belly as if to shield our child. His own hand, anchored by the weight of his platinum wedding ring, came to rest on my shoulder. From the entrance to his grand, oak-paneled study, his tone was dangerously calm. "You're being hysterical. Put that away before you uncover something you can't possibly comprehend." His message was unmistakable. "Forget what you've seen, Lottie. This doesn't leave the study." I felt a tiny flutter, a small life protesting against the palm of my hand. He wasn't just hiding an affair. This was a blueprint for large-scale bribery, and I had just stumbled upon the key. Arthur stepped closer, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Charlotte, you will not be leaving this brownstone." My fingers shook as I palmed the old skeleton key from a ceramic dish on the mantelpiece. The narrow door to the old servant's staircase creaked open silently. Using my phone's light to cut through the darkness, I slipped into the dusty, cramped stairwell as the sound of his measured footsteps crossed the Persian rug behind me. The stairwell was a tight, suffocating passage. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, his expensive whiskey, and betrayal. My unborn baby was the only truth in this terrifying escape. "Oh, my love, I am so sorry." "I know, but we have to go. I promise you'll be safe with me." A sharp thud vibrated through the old house, the sound of his fist hitting the solid oak door of the study. He was coming down the main staircase. I moved faster as I reached the ground floor, my own breathing loud in my ears. Every step felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I could hear him now, the crisp sound of his leather loafers on the marble entryway floor as he descended. "Don't be a fool, Charlotte," his voice boomed from the foyer. I whispered to my unborn child, "Just be quiet, my darling. We are almost there." We reached the back alley door just as his form appeared at the end of the long hall, imposing, enraged, and silhouetted against the dim light from the front of the house. His figure advanced down the corridor, a predator closing the distance. My pulse was a drum against my ribs. The door was bolted, requiring the old, heavy key I was fumbling to fit into the lock. My hands trembled as I twisted the key, stuck. It was still stuck. His walk slowed, now a powerful, confident march. "This is over, Charlotte," he called out. "Let's go back to the study." I gave the key one last, desperate turn, a loud clank. The bolt slid back. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the cold night air. The cobbled alley was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breaths. A plain sedan was idling near the street. Its passenger side door opened, and a steady voice called, "Lottie, for God's sake, get in!" It was my oldest friend, practical, fearless, and absolutely horrified for my sake. Chloe. Before I could form a word, she was reaching over the center console, yanking my seatbelt across my body, and helping me slam the heavy car door shut. I jammed the lock down just as Arthur's palms hit the glass, his face a contorted mask of fury. One of the other men yelled, "Get out of the car, now!" Chloe floored it. The tires squealed against the weathered cobblestones, the sound echoing off the brick walls like a gunshot. The sedan lurched forward, navigating the narrow alley until we burst onto the rain-slicked Boston street. It felt like my heart was trying to batter its way out of my ribcage. My baby gave a strong, definitive kick. "It's all right. We are safe now." Chloe shot me a look, her expression hard. "We won't be followed. I know who she is." She turned her attention back to the road, her knuckles stark white on the steering wheel. "Arthur isn't just cheating, Lottie. He's in their pocket. And that makes you a liability." "What are you saying?" I pleaded. "They were planning to silence you tonight." "They intended to persuade you to stay quiet," Chloe clarified. "But the moment you opened that ledger detailing the Apex Tower kickbacks, you became a problem they had to solve." The city lights smeared across the windows. Rain lashed the windshield. Chloe made a sharp turn, merging into the flow of traffic on Atlantic Avenue, just as Arthur's black town car appeared in our side mirror. "He's on our tail," Chloe stated, her jaw clenched. "Then let's burn it all down." She navigated her phone with her free hand. "I'm uploading the entire ledger to my source at the Securities and Exchange Commission." A chill went down my spine. "But Arthur is the one who gave me the combination to that safe." Chloe's eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. "Arthur trusted you would be too complacent to ever look that closely. He knew I'd help you bring his whole world down if he ever truly hurt you. I didn't share my suspicions earlier because you needed to find the proof for yourself." Her tone softened for a moment. "And now you have. His car was gaining on us." Chloe muttered, "Brace yourself." We swerved unexpectedly, taking an exit toward the waterfront, a chorus of angry horns erupting around us. Arthur's car was blocked by a city bus, his headlights shrinking in the distance until they were finally gone. The taillights disappeared into the city haze. Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand. "Charlotte, take a breath. As soon as my guy Liam gets this to the U.S. attorney, Arthur won't be hunting you. He'll be running from them." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the terror in my chest began to recede. At that moment, Chloe's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "It's Liam," she said, her voice barely audible. "He says Arthur is back at the Beacon Hill house." My mouth went dry. "Is he alone?" Chloe shook her head, slowly, with purpose. "No. And Liam says Arthur left something behind for you." Liam met us in the marble lobby of a downtown federal building as the first hint of dawn appeared. The sky over Boston Harbor was a bruised, anxious shade of purple, and the entire city felt like it was holding its breath. I held my stomach as Liam led us into an elevator, his professional silence somehow more unsettling than words. Chloe stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows while Liam set a sealed evidence bag on the massive conference table. Inside was a single piece of vellum, a hand-drawn architectural rendering of a children's hospital wing, the very project Genevieve had used to build her philanthropic reputation, the one that won her awards and acclaim. Now, it just looked like a schematic for a crime. "This was in a courier pack left on your doorstep," Liam said gently. "Arthur's driver delivered it less than an hour ago." My voice was a fragile whisper. "So this drawing, it's a message from him." Liam nodded grimly. "He also sent a voice file along with it, addressed to you." My hands were numb as I took the phone he offered. Arthur's polished corporate headshot filled the screen, but the voice that emerged was raw and defeated, all the arrogance stripped away. "Charlotte," he began, "I swear to God, I never wanted you to find out like this. I had no idea she was planning to funnel the funds offshore to steal your family's initial donation. By the time I realized she was setting me up to take the fall, it was too late. I thought I could fix it." He stopped, and I could hear his unsteady breath. "But you can't fix this kind of betrayal." "What I did," he corrected, his voice cracking. "I am sorry for all of it. The lies, the stolen money, the damage to your heart. You and our baby deserved so much more than me." The message ended. The quiet that followed was immense. I thought my knees would buckle. But instead of falling, a strange, profound stillness washed over me. Liam stepped closer. "The ledger you secured is with the federal prosecutor now. A team is securing your brownstone as we speak." And Genevieve Dubois was apprehended at Logan Airport, attempting to board a flight to Geneva. Justice. It didn't feel like a victory, just a quiet, clean-cut conclusion. Liam let out a long breath. "You're both out of harm's way now, Charlotte. You and your child. Safe." The word felt foreign, like from a dream. I felt a gentle stirring from inside me. "Mama, do you think we can live somewhere with a garden?" I imagined myself asking my child one day. A real smile touched my face. "I think we can do that." Liam waited a moment, then moved toward me, his presence solid and respectful. "Charlotte, I know this is far too soon, but when you are ready to start over, not to run from this, but to build something new, I hope you'll allow me to be there, as your friend, for the both of you." His sincerity was like the sun breaking through after a week of storms. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I let myself picture a life founded on truth and kindness, not on constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I nodded, my eyes filling with tears. "Perhaps we can start now." And right then, the future finally seemed like it belonged to me again. And that, my listeners, is where her life truly began anew. If you have stayed with this story until the very end, it is probably because some element of it resonated deep within you. Perhaps it was a reminder of a battle you yourself have won. Perhaps it contained a piece of wisdom you needed to hear today. Or perhaps it was simply a quiet promise that even after the most devastating tempests, a new dawn is always possible. The Stoic philosophers had a term for this concept. The impediment to action advances action. Charlotte's ordeal is a perfect illustration of this idea. Each act of deceit became a painful but necessary lesson in her own worth. Each loss cleared the way for a new type of beginning. Every moment that seemed designed to shatter her spirit instead forged her into someone stronger, more resolute, and more deeply connected to her own inner power. As the philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." This is the core truth of her experience. We cannot always control our circumstances, but we can always control our response to them. If Charlotte can walk through that kind of fire and find her way back to the light, then you can too. Before you go, I'd like to ask you, did her story stir something in you? Did it help you to breathe a little easier, or maybe see your own hurdles in a different light? If it did, I would be deeply grateful if you would like this video, share it with someone who might need a ray of hope tonight, and of course, subscribe to our channel. Your support is what enables these stories to find their way to the people who need to hear them the most. As we come to a close, it is essential for me to state clearly for the entire YouTube community and every person listening. The story just shared is a complete fabrication. It was developed exclusively for entertainment and to create an emotional connection. If any part of it mirrors real people, life experiences, or specific situations, that is purely by chance. The characters, their challenges, and the unfolding plot were all intentionally designed to be uplifting, to offer comfort, and to provide our viewers with a safe space for exploring significant themes of healing, resilience, and self-realization. No portion of this broadcast should be considered a statement of fact or a real-life testimony. Our one and only objective is to produce and share compelling stories that connect with the shared human journey, inspiring all of us to examine our own paths with greater empathy and wisdom. We thank you for being with us today, for your open-mindedness, and for your generous attention.